The city you once navigated with ease has ceased to exist. What remains is not a shelter, but a sprawling, decaying labyrinth that has transformed into a definitive kill mechanism. In this post-collapse reality, the urban environment is hostile architecture designed to process a population that is no longer operational. The margin of error is zero. You must immediately purge the loot drop mentality ingrained by popular media. There are no rewards waiting for you, and the environment does not care if you survive. There is only physics, biology, and the brutal mathematics of survival. Every vertical wall and locked door acts as a filter, separating your biological system from the resources necessary to maintain homeostasis. You must view every barrier through the lens of metabolic cost. If you expend 2,000 calories attempting to breach a reinforced steel door using brute force only to retrieve 500 calories of consumable energy, you have not secured resources. You have committed an act of calorie bankruptcy. Repeat this mathematical error twice, and you enter a spiral of physiological degradation from which recovery is impossible. Survival is not a game of chance. It is a cold calculation of energy expenditure versus energy acquisition. The old world is over. The laws of property have been superseded by the laws of thermodynamics. Access is no longer a legal question. It is a biological imperative. To survive the dead city, you must abandon the mindset of a scavenger and adopt the operational protocols of a technician. You cannot rely on muscle, which is expensive and finite. You must rely on leverage, mechanical advantage, and specific instrumentation to negate the physical barriers of the urban grid. You need tools that convert a chaotic environment into a navigable system. We will now identify the devices that turn the city from a prison into a resource. To breach a structure is to engage in a physics problem where the variables are mass, velocity, and structural integrity. Most survivors fail this equation because they rely on the Hollywood protocol, the belief that a human body can overcome a hardened barrier through kinetic impact. This is a confident mistake. A standard exterior door is reinforced by a deadbolt, a strike plate, and a frame anchored into studs. When you apply your shoulder or foot to this system, you are pitting your connective tissue against steel and seasoned wood. Newton's third law dictates that the force you exert is returned to your skeleton. In a scenario where medical infrastructure has collapsed, a fractured metatarsal or a dislocated shoulder is not an inconvenience. It is a slow death sentence. You must treat your body as a finite battery, not a battering ram. We must apply the multiplier rule. Biological force is insufficient. You require mechanical advantage. The objective is to convert low-energy input into high-yield output. A pry bar, a wedge, or a pick applies leverage, multiplying your torque by a factor determined by the length of the handle and the fulcrum point. This preserves your caloric reserves and protects your physical chassis. Furthermore, we must analyze the acoustic signature of the breach. Brute force is chaotic and loud. In a hostile urban environment, noise is a distress beacon that attracts competition and predators. The crowd psychology of a desperate population dictates that any sign of activity draws attention. To be loud is to be targeted. Therefore, we categorize entry methods into two distinct protocols: soft entry and hard entry. Soft entry aligns with the gray man philosophy. It is non-destructive, silent, and leaves the barrier intact for your own future use. It manipulates the locking mechanism rather than destroying it. Hard entry is destructive, loud, and final. It renders the door useless as a defensive asset once breached. You must always prioritize soft entry. Hard entry is the last resort, only to be deployed when the calorie reward significantly outweighs the risk of exposure. You are a ghost, not a storm. Survival is not primarily about ballistics, it is about biology. While you are worrying about ammunition, your body is quietly calculating its fluid balance. The most immediate kill mechanism in a post-collapse environment is not a marauder, but dehydration. The tactical standard states you can survive 3 days without water, but this is a civilian metric. In a high-stress, high-exertion scenario, your combat effectiveness degrades within 24 hours. Cognitive function collapses, reaction times slow, and decision-making becomes erratic. You are dead long before your heart stops. Therefore, the first key you require does not open a door. It opens the city's veins. This device is the Silcock key, often referred to as a four-way water key. It is the master key to the urban water infrastructure. In the commercial and industrial sectors of the city, exterior water spigots are engineered without handles to prevent vandalism and unauthorized access. To the uninitiated, these are useless metal stubs. To the strategist holding this tool, they are isotonic salvation. This simple cross-shaped alloy grants you access to the residual water supply trapped within the municipal grid. We must understand the physics of the grid to exploit it. The water system relies on hydrostatic pressure. Even after the electrical grid fails and the municipal pump cease, millions of gallons of water remain suspended in the pipes, held at pressure by gravity tanks and water towers located at higher elevations. This is potential energy waiting to be released. By attaching the Silcock key to a commercial spigot found on the sides of strip malls, office parks, and industrial warehouses, you can tap into this arterial system. This approach applies the Gray Man protocol to resource acquisition. While the crowd riots over the last remaining plastic bottles in a looted supermarket, a classic high-risk, low-reward engagement, you are in the alleyway behind a forgotten warehouse, silently filling your reservoirs. You are extracting resources from the infrastructure itself, avoiding the kill zones entirely. The Silcock key represents the difference between a scavenger who fights for scraps and a technician who understands the engineering of the environment. It weighs mere ounces, yet it commands the most critical resource in the biosphere. Do not overlook the utility of bleeding the building. You are turning the city's architecture into a life support machine. When the Gray Man protocol fails and the lock cannot be picked, you must escalate to hard entry. At this junction, we invoke the multiplier rule. Your biological output is capped. A human can only generate so much torque. To defeat hardened steel, you require a force multiplier. Enter the Halligan bar. This is not a mere crowbar. It is the crowning achievement of forcible entry physics, refined by generations of firefighters to disassemble structures that do not wish to be disassembled. The Halligan is a masterclass in mechanical advantage. It features 3 distinct operational ends: the adze, a wedge; the pick, a puncturing point; and the fork, a lever. Each component is designed to exploit the weakest points of a barrier: the seams, the jambs, and the hinges. When you insert the adze into the gap between a door and its frame and apply force to the handle, you are not just pushing. You are utilizing a lever arm to convert pounds of pressure into tons of spreading force. A deadbolt is strong against a shoulder impact, but it is structurally helpless against the relentless, expanding geometry of a wedge driven by leverage. Consider the physics of a standard outward-opening commercial door. These are designed to be impenetrable to kicks or battering rams. The frame absorbs the kinetic energy. However, the Halligan attacks the latch mechanism directly. By driving the fork over the latch and torquing the bar, you translate rotational motion into linear separation. The steel yields because it must. This is hard logic applied to destruction. You are not fighting the door. You are disengaging its structural integrity. The Halligan bar allows you to bypass the need for caloric density. You do not need to be the strongest entity in the sector. You simply need the longest lever. This tool turns a formidable barricade into a minor equation. However, be aware of the trade-off. Using a Halligan is a declaration of presence. The sound of steel rendering timber and metal is unmistakable. It violates the gray man principle, converting you from a ghost into a target. Therefore, this tool is subject to the protocol of necessity. It is the answer when silence is no longer a luxury you can afford. It is the physical manifestation of the refusal to be denied access. While the Halligan bar commands the physics of leverage, it fails the protocol of silence. In a densely populated hostile environment, the sound of splintering wood is a dinner bell for predators. To survive, you must often exist below the threshold of perception. This brings us to the most sophisticated application of the gray man philosophy: non-destructive entry. The tools of choice here are bump keys and rockers, or jigglers. These instruments do not force the lock, they deceive it. We must understand the mechanics of the pin tumbler lock, the most common security device in the modern world. It relies on a stack of pins obstructing a shear line. To rotate the plug and open the door, these pins must be aligned perfectly. A standard key does this mechanically. A bump key, however, utilizes the physics of kinetic energy transfer, identical to the principle observed in a Newton's cradle. When you insert a specially cut bump key and strike it, the force is transmitted through the key into the bottom pins and then transferred to the top driver pins. For a split second, a micromoment of mechanical confusion, the driver pins jump upward, clearing the shear line. If you apply torque at that exact millisecond, the lock opens. It is not magic. It is the manipulation of momentum. For lower security mechanisms such as filing cabinets, older vehicles, and utility boxes, we deploy rockers. These rely on statistical probability and the loose tolerances of cheap manufacturing. By scrubbing the tool back and forth across the wafers or pins, you mimic the biting of the correct key through randomness. Eventually, the mechanism reaches a state of entropy where it yields. The tactical superiority of these tools lies not just in entry, but in the preservation of the barrier. This is a critical strategic concept often missed by amateurs. If you kick down a door, you have destroyed your own perimeter. You cannot sleep securely behind a door you have shattered. A breached entrance screams to the street that the structure is occupied and vulnerable. However, if you manipulate the lock, you can enter, close the door, and relock it from the inside. To the outside observer, the building remains a sealed, dead structure. You maintain the camouflage of the empty city. You are not a looter leaving a trail of destruction. You are a ghost moving through walls. The gray man leaves no trace, and consequently leaves no scent for the pack to follow. The modern city is a vertical labyrinth, and in a collapse scenario, altitude is a strategic asset. However, the pathways to that altitude, the stairwells, are definitive kill mechanisms. In a high-rise structure without power, the stairwell becomes the sole artery for movement. This makes it a predictable, high-traffic choke point. It is where ambushes are laid, where diseases spread through close contact, and where the panicked crowd bottles up in a stampede. To enter a stairwell is to surrender your tactical agency to the geometry of the building. You are walking into a fatal funnel. To survive the vertical city, you must access its backstage. You need to enter the spaces that the architects designed for machines, not people. This requires the elevator drop key. This simple articulated steel rod is designed to manipulate the lunar keys or drop keyholes found on the upper exterior of elevator hoistway doors. In normal operations, these are used by firefighters and technicians to manually disengage the mechanical interlock that keeps the doors sealed when the car is not present. By inserting the key and manipulating the internal latch, you can force the outer doors to slide open, regardless of where the elevator car is stationed. Once opened, the elevator shaft ceases to be a transport system and becomes a tactical flanking route. While the stairwells are congested with threats, the shaft is a silent vertical void, a concrete chimney isolated from the chaos of the floors. Most shafts are equipped with maintenance ladders running the entire height of the structure. This allows you to traverse floors silently, bypassing barricaded hallways and guarded landings. This is vertical flanking. You are moving through the skeletal system of the building, invisible to the inhabitants of the skin. Furthermore, the elevator car itself, often stranded between floors when the grid fails, can serve as an emergency gray man shelter. It is a hardened steel box suspended in a void, inaccessible to anyone without a drop key or a breaching tool. It is a bunker hidden in plain sight. However, this environment demands absolute respect for gravity and physics. A slip here is terminal, but the risk of gravity is a constant variable you can control with skill. The risk of a stairwell ambush is a chaotic variable you cannot mitigate. Choose the danger you can manage. There comes a critical junction in the survival timeline when subtlety is exhausted and mechanical leverage is insufficient. When you are confronted with a hardened industrial barrier, a shuttered loading dock, a boron alloy chain, or a rusted security gate, you must escalate to the nuclear option of urban entry, the cordless angle grinder. This device represents total barrier negation. Unlike the Halligan, which battles the structural integrity of the frame, or the lockpick, which negotiates with the mechanism, the angle grinder ignores the geometry of the lock entirely. It attacks the material physics of the obstruction itself. With a diamond-tipped or abrasive cutoff wheel spinning at 10,000 revolutions per minute, you are not prying. You are deleting. Hardened steel shackles, rebar, and commercial hinges are reduced to dust and sparks in seconds. The grinder does not ask for permission. It removes the physical capacity of the barrier to exist. This is the ultimate application of the multiplier rule, where stored electrical energy replaces biological effort to achieve a result that is physically impossible for the human body alone. However, this power incurs a severe tactical debt that must be calculated using hard logic. The angle grinder relies on lithium-ion batteries, a finite, non-renewable commodity in a post-grid world. Every second the trigger is depressed is a withdrawal from an energy bank account that may never be replenished. You must view battery charge as a currency more valuable than ammunition. You do not deploy this tool to open a residential pantry or a low-value target. That is a waste of strategic capital. You reserve the grinder for high-value loot drops, pharmacy cages, industrial logistics centers, or infrastructure controls, where the calorie return on investment is exponentially higher than the energy cost of the battery. Furthermore, the tactical signature of an angle grinder is catastrophic. It generates a noise profile exceeding 100 decibels, audible for blocks in the silence of a dead city. It produces a shower of sparks, a visual flare visible for miles at night. It creates the distinct, lingering smell of burning metal. In terms of crowd psychology, utilizing this tool is equivalent to firing a weapon. It announces your location, your capability, and the fact that you have secured something worth breaching. The noise acts as a distress beacon, drawing the desperate and the predatory toward your position. Therefore, the protocol for the grinder is defined by speed and violence of action. You cut, you breach, you extract, and you vanish. If you linger to admire your work, the noise will bring the kill mechanism to you. Do not let the power of the tool seduce you into complacency. It is a target designator as much as it is a key. Possessing these 5 devices does not automatically grant you survival. Without a governing philosophy, they are merely heavy steel anchors that accelerate your calorie bankruptcy. To effectively utilize this arsenal, you must integrate these tools into a rigid operational protocol. You must move from the mindset of a collector to the mindset of an operator. The weight of your gear is a tax on your energy reserves, and you cannot afford to pay that tax without a guaranteed return on investment. You must establish a tiered loadout system. The Silcock key and the lockpick set are your Tier 1 assets. They are lightweight, concealable, and facilitate the gray man philosophy. They should remain on your person at all times, securing your hydration and non-destructive access to shelter. The Halligan bar and the angle grinder are Tier 2 assets. These are mission-specific tools. You do not patrol with a Halligan bar, you deploy it. You only carry this weight when you have identified a hardened target, calculated the caloric value of the loot drop inside, and determined that the payoff exceeds the energy cost of transport and breach. Carrying heavy breaching tools, just in case, is an amateur error that leads to fatigue and death. When you approach a barrier, you must execute a strict escalation of force. This is a linear decision matrix designed to minimize risk. Step 1. Reconnaissance. Analyze the structure. Is the door the only way in? Often, the crowd focuses on the reinforced front entrance while a ground floor window or a loading dock offers a bypass. Step 2. Soft entry. Attempt a bump key or the rocker. If you can enter without sound and without damage, you preserve the structure as a potential safe house. You remain a ghost. Step 3. Mechanical leverage. If the lock holds and the resource is critical, deploy the Halligan. You are now trading silence for access. You have alerted the environment. Step 4. Total negation. The angle grinder is the final escalation. It is used only when the barrier is absolute and the resource inside is a matter of life or death. Once you trigger the grinder, you are on a timer. You must breach, extract, and evacuate before the noise draws the kill mechanism to your coordinates. Finally, recognize the psychological threshold you are crossing. A locked door is the last vestige of the old world's order. When you breach it, you are destroying the concept of private property and replacing it with the law of survival. Be prepared for what lies on the other side. It may be resources, it may be nothing. It may be a threat that has been waiting in the dark. Every time you open a door, you roll the dice against the universe. These tools shift the odds in your favor, but they do not eliminate the gamble. The city is a puzzle of steel and concrete designed to keep you out. You now possess the logic and the leverage to dismantle that puzzle piece by piece. The old world is over. The margin of error is 0. Proceed with caution.